What's going on, AP people? We have Alan Brinkley's American History Chapter 8 review video for you today. Varieties of American Nationalism. This is all Henry Clay, all chapter long. I cannot wait. Well, let's talk about building a national market. The first Bank of the United States, which was originally chartered under Alexander Hamilton, was set to expire in 1811, and we're going to have a 5-year period where there is no Bank of the United States. So we have a bunch of state banks that are issuing notes or banknotes, which is essentially currency at this time. And then 5 years later, we have the second bus, and this will be chartered for another 20 years, and it's going to end in 1836. And this is going to cause all sorts of problems, so you will have to be familiar with the ending of the bus. Also around this time, we have Francis Cabot Lowell from Massachusetts, who builds the first mill for spinning and weaving in American history. And we have a bunch of post-War of 1812 economic problems. Britain, which is now finally able to trade with the U.S. again after all those embargoes are lifted against her, flood the U.S. market with goods, sometimes even below cost, and this really hurts American industries. So the U.S. is going to begin to demand tariffs, or a tax on imported goods, which will raise the price of foreign goods and make American goods more appealing. And we'll see the Tariff of 1816 is designed to protect American industries, and this is the first tariff in U.S. history that is passed to protect American industries, not just raise revenue. Okay, we're going to talk about some transportation. The U.S. is beginning to expand out west, and we see the building of roads, canals, turnpikes, etc. So a big question during this time period is who should fund this? Should it be the federal government or the state government? We have the National Road, which the federal government funds, and it's built from Cumberland, Maryland to Wheeling, Virginia. And we have John C. Calhoun from South Carolina, who in 1816 is a huge nationalist, and he will change his position as time goes on, but he is in favor of an internal improvements bill. Ah! How on earth does this guy on the right turn to this guy on the left? Look at that. I don't know. If you can figure it out, let me know. So this proposed the federal government to finance internal improvements. And he said, and this was part of a DBQ from a couple years ago, let us then bind the republic together with a perfect system of roads and canals. And this was vetoed by President Madison because he believed Congress did not have the authority to fund the project. All right, after the War of 1812, many Americans are moving westward. We know this because there's fewer threats from Native Americans, and also the British are no longer end post along the Great Lakes that they were in before. There's a huge increase in population, and there's a need for more farmland out west. Cotton, like the plant before tobacco, exhausted the land and was a large cash crop, so there was a need for more and more land to grow this. There's some cotton there. And building of forts on the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes was done by the federal government to protect Americans. And the Erie Canal was also built in 1825, which was built from Albany to Buffalo, but really helped connect the Atlantic Ocean all the way as far as Illinois through the Great Lakes. And in 1821, Mexico gains independence, and this helps out the U.S. by trading a lot more with Mexico. The U.S. goes through a time period known as the Era of Good Feelings, which is a huge increase in nationalism post-War of 1812. This is a time period where there really is only one political party, the Democratic Republicans, because the Federalists are not around much. And the reason is, think of the Hartford Convention from the War of 1812. In this time period, the Era of Good Feelings is attributed to James Monroe's presidency, which was from 1817 to 1825. In the election of 1816, we see James Monroe be elected, and this is a continuation of the Virginia dynasty. If you look here, we have Washington and Jefferson, the first and third presidents of the United States, and we have Madison the fourth and Monroe the fifth. So 4 out of the 5 first presidents were all from Virginia. Rufus King, who ran as a Federalist, received only 34 electoral votes, so he got destroyed. Monroe chooses John Quincy Adams as his Secretary of State, which is essentially going to be his named successor because Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe were all Secretary of States before. So this is a really good shot for John Quincy Adams to become president, which he will. He also does a goodwill tour throughout the United States, and a Boston newspaper coins it the Era of Good Feelings. So we have some issues in Florida, however. The Seminole War in Florida was an invasion of Florida by Andrew Jackson, and he went and pushed Native Americans back into Florida. And then in 1819, we have the Adams-Onis Treaty. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams and Spanish diplomat Onis sign a treaty in which the U.S. gains all of Florida in exchange for the following. The U.S. had to give up its claim to Texas, which it will regret this decision in a few years, and Spain gave up its claim to the Pacific Northwest, which we'll get into in later chapters as well. All right, we have a financial panic. Now, here is a rule of thumb to follow in APUS. We are going to see so many financial panics. When you see a financial panic, when in doubt, panics are caused by speculation or over speculation, which is buying of a good in the hopes of selling it at a higher price in the future. So the only reason you're buying something is in the hope of turning around and making a quick profit. This is going to be a cause of the Panic of 1819, and the over speculation is going to occur with land. The second Bank of the United States is 3 years new here, and it's going to begin to tighten its credit, meaning not give out as many loans, and it's going to start to call in loans that it has given out. Many state banks are going to fail as a result of this. George Washington, who was not on the dollar bill because this dollar bill did not exist, was freaking out like that. And as a result of this depression, many Americans blamed the bus, the Bank of the United States. And this is going to be a really hot topic, political topic, especially during Andrew Jackson's presidency. All right, so we have sectionalism and nationalism. The Missouri Compromise, a very important compromise, also known as the Compromise of 1820. Missouri, which is a part of the Louisiana Purchase, applies for statehood as a slave state. This would make 12 slave states and 11 free, so this would upset that equal balance. We also have a congressman from New York, Talmadge, introduce a Talmadge Amendment, which proposed for gradual emancipation of slaves in Missouri. And the South hated this. They resisted it heavily. They saw this. This was seen as a step towards ending all slavery everywhere. So the solution is Missouri is going to be added as a slave state. Maine, which belonged to Massachusetts, is added as a free state. And the states are going to be equal at 12 apiece then. 12 free, 12 slaves. So neither side has an advantage in the Senate. Also, the third part, slavery is going to be prohibited above the 3630 latitude line. So if we look here, here is Missouri. Notice, in fact, it is above that 3630, but here is this red line. So every future state that will be added here is guaranteed to be free as a part of the Missouri Compromise. Everyone down here will be slave. So what's the impact of the Missouri Compromise? Slavery would be the #1 issue in national politics until the Civil War. So for the next 40 years, everything is going to revolve around slavery, as we will see. And this helps lead to an increase in sectionalism, and this is the beginning of that movement away from nationalism that the era of good feelings is known for. All right, we have John Marshall, the 4th Chief Justice of the United States. Many court cases associated with him. I do have a video on key court cases under John Marshall, so if you wish to know more detail, please check those out. Thing to keep in mind with John Marshall, lots of multiple choice questions will ask you about him. During his time as the Chief Justice, the national government became more powerful, and this happens at the expense of states, and he also helps improve the economy. So some court cases you need to know. Dartmouth College versus Woodward dealt with the issue of New Hampshire trying to change the charter of Dartmouth and change it from a private institution into a state university. Daniel Webster, who goes on to be this well-known senator, he's a great orator. He argues the case on behalf of Dartmouth. And Marshall and the Supreme Court said a charter is a contract that could not be changed. So the government cannot interfere with contracts. Cohens versus Virginia. The Supreme states that the Supreme Court can review state court decisions, so this is a huge blow to states. So the federal government gains more power at states' expense. So the federal government can now overturn state decisions. McCulloch versus Maryland is a hugely important one. This dealt with the issue of the Bank of the United States. Maryland hated it, so it put a tax on the bus. Goes all the way to Supreme Court, and Marshall says that the states could not tax a federal agency. He says the power to tax is the power to destroy. So what's the impact of this? Well, couple things. One, the Supreme Court states that the bus is constitutional. It has a chance. The Bank of the United States comes before the court, and they have a chance to say, you know what, this bus shouldn't even be in existence, but they don't. So they recognize that the bus is in fact constitutional, and it also recognizes that the federal government is supreme over states because states cannot tax a federal agency. Another one dealing with states versus federal government is Gibbons v. Ogden in 1824. And this dealt with interstate trade. And that term interstate means involving more than one state. So this involves trade with more than one state. this case states that only Congress could regulate interstate trade, not an individual state, New York. So on the left, we have New York saying, this boat from New York saying, get out. New York gave me the exclusive right to operate steamships in New York waters. And on the right, the new boat is saying, wrong. New York gave the United States the exclusive right to regulate interstate commerce. So again, we see the federal government is more powerful than the state governments. Finally, we have Wurster versus Georgia, which deals with Native Americans, and Andrew Jackson, say that Georgia could not interfere with native land, and the decision was not enforced, and the natives ended up being forced to leave from Georgia. All right, let's talk about the Monroe Doctrine. This happens in 1823. It was written primarily by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, and it essentially warns Europe to stay out of Latin America. And the U.S. would consider any challenge to Latin America as unfriendly. Keep in mind during this time, most of Latin America is receiving its independence from Spain. So in return, the U.S. would stay out of European affairs. And here's a great political cartoon that describes the Monroe Doctrine very well. You see Uncle Sam here. See one half of the world, the Western Hemisphere, North and South America. And notice he is the only one over here, and you have Uncle Sam's hat in the middle. And in the Eastern Hemisphere, you have all these European countries, and Uncle Sam is telling them stay out. So some impacts. The short term, there's really little to no impact. It isn't even named the Monroe Doctrine until about 30 years later, but the long term, the U.S. would become the most dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. This also reiterates this idea that the U.S. will stay out of European affairs and alliances. All right, let's jump ahead to 1824. We have the corrupt bargain. We have 4 candidates running for the election of 1824, and I do have a very detailed video on this, so check that out if you want more information. None of the 4 candidates win an electoral majority, although Andrew Jackson has the most electoral and popular votes. So you notice here the green, that's all Andrew Jackson. He won 99 electoral votes, or 38%, and he won 43% of the popular vote. However, to become president, you have to win 51% of the electoral votes. So according to the 12th Amendment, the House would then decide on the top 3 candidates. Unfortunately for Henry Clay, he comes in 4th. He's the 4th candidate running. So he's automatically out of the running. However, he was the Speaker of the House, so he had a lot of power to influence the election. He throws his support behind John Quincy Adams. Adams becomes president, Congress decides to elect him, and Henry Clay becomes his Secretary of State. And this is where the alleged corrupt bargain name comes in. And the reason why it's so important that Henry Clay becomes Secretary of State is because, again, that Secretary of State was seen as a stepping stone. So he envisions that he will be guaranteed to become the next president, but unfortunately for him, it's too soon. He never becomes president. So he promotes while he's Secretary of State, this thing that becomes known as the American system. And this is 3 parts to it. There's protective tariffs, as seen as the Tariff of 1816, internal improvements, the building of roads, canals, etc., and the Bank of the United States. Those 3 parts he really advocates. And Jackson and his supporters are outraged over the alleged corrupt bargain. All right, 1828, flash forward 4 years. Not much you need to know about Adams' presidency. We have the Tariff of Abominations, which raised tariff rates drastically. And we see way down here is the Tariff of 1816. It's very low compared to the Tariff of 1828 here. And you can see it is super, super high. So the Tariff of 18 is very, very high. It is hated by the South and the West because they receive no tariff protection, but it is favored by manufacturers in New England. So in 1828, we also have the election of 1828, which is John Quincy Adams versus Jackson, round 2. Andrew Jackson absolutely destroys John Adams. He is the winner of all this yellow area here. He wins 178 to 83 in the electoral voting. Problems do await Andrew Jackson, as we will see in the next chapter. All right, that's it for me. Hopefully I cleared up a lot of things for Chapter 8 for you. Please take a moment and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. Take a moment also and share this with anybody you think would find this beneficial. I appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave them in the video and I will get back to you. Thank you for watching and have a good day, guys.